Hello, everyone. Hello, fellow attempted counter racists. We're going to be doing the preview of the destruction of Black civilization. Great issues of a race from 4500 BC to 2000 AD by Chancellor Williams. And before we jump into it, can we just give brief summaries of what we had learned from the preview? I'll start. I learned that those who control our education system have done a great job in erasing history that is Black civilization, and they have replaced it with a very linear narrative that Black people were savage creatures from Africa who were brought here to be westernized through slavery. And that narrative has been central in my personal educational experiences with Western education systems, such as K through 12 schooling. And yeah, I just learned the many ways that Black history has been dismantled and hidden from Black people and other non-white people.
Yeah, what I took from this short preview is like a glimpse into the juicy information that we're going to get on the intricate system and like the way in which their civilization was like fully established and running. So the like if you think about it, if there's a place that's been completely whitewashed, like if you see with gentrification and area is completely taken over, it's because there's something there that everybody else wanted, and the fact that Egypt is what it is, and then we have the constant stigma of being the undeveloped third world country. This book is going to give us the insight that levels that playing field of removing that third world stigmatism, because all that I could pick up when reading the preview was the civilization that he's describing sounds like America today. It sounds like a one governmental system that has little states in between. It sounded very much like America. And it just made me feel like everything that we have today is probably modeled after the intricate systems that we had there. So yeah, looking forward to the rest.
Yeah, I didn't mention what I knew about Egypt in the question. So just that it was the culmination of civilization, of the years of migration up through the Nile Valley, and where, like you said, all science and education originated, and just what I heard that what Trey and Mary shared, same thing. The destruction of the education system, the hiding, the fact that there was a democratic system in place already. That and I love that example that he gave of the explorer. They came and he was and that's the example that was used of how everything they learned was misconstrued, and then they spread the lie of their education through just a misunderstanding. And the example that he gave was the king made this explorer wait, and these random people were walking up and going in front of these white people, and the white folks looked at it as privilege when it wasn't that at all. It was an established system of it wasn't hierarchy. It was an established system. He wasn't allowed to speak to them until he consulted with other counselors, and so that got misconstrued into some kind of hierarchical idea. And so it just reinforced that they everything that they got was from somehow came out of Africa. And I almost highlighted the entire preview. I won't belabor this because I know we're going to discuss it, but just that what blew me away, I think more than anything else, that is like the Black Arabs that have adopted Arabic and consider themselves Arab and not African is the same as Black Americans that consider themselves American and not African. It helped with my own identity. I know that. And then the information about the mulattoes, how I had no idea that it's the opposite in Asia and in North Africa, that if I would be considered white, whereas here I'm considered Black. It's just a drop of a drop of white blood in the African makes you white. And it's just I don't know. I don't know if I'm happy about that or what I feel. So yeah, that's I'm gonna leave that as my observation so far.
Yeah. Very well said, Ben. And for context, I just want to read the part that Ben had spoke about. What became of the Black people of Sumner? The traveler asked the old man, for ancient records show that the people of Sumner were Black. What happened to them? Ah, the old man sighed. They lost their history, so they died. A Sumner legend. I just wanted to get that for context. People can continue giving their concise summaries.
I'll go next. I appreciated what Ben said. Those were the parts that stuck out to me the most too. That story, I loved how it's just so interesting because it's like, you know, well, okay, let me start over. What I really liked about the preview is that unfortunately, because Chancellor Williams' work is going to be so discredited, he goes through this extensive process of like showing the amount of research, what type of research he did. And I loved that part because it just shows like how extensive and meaningful this work was for him to go through all of that. So I really appreciated that. And that there were parts that I felt like I was reading parts of like Miseducation of the Negro, the way he goes into the Black academics' understanding of their own history and like European history. I really liked that too. And the story that Ben was talking about, I thought that was amazing in terms of everything that you read that is, oh, is there an echo? Is the echo bad or is it
It's not bad.
Okay. Yeah, so everything that you read about African history from a European perspective is always going to be skewed because they don't understand things not based in selfishness. So even like that, things that are based in duty, they're going to interpret it in a different way. So I think it was amazing that he actually went to these countries and like went through the work of like, listening to oral histories, because I think that oral histories are really undervalued. So yeah, I'm really excited to read the culmination of all of this work that he did.
Well said, Ash. I really appreciated how we get to see how this journey began, because unlike most of us here, Chancellor Williams left high school already knowing like a lot of the history about his people, how like the Blacks were already great contributors to society and humanity. But I really appreciated how we began understanding that like we belong to a race of nobodies, and we get to discover how that has happened, through like nature, through the white Arabs and the white invaders, how that has like splintered and decimated the Black people. It's like, damn, it's like just thousands of years of just trauma has made us like really, really at the bottom of the barrel. And it's really nice to understand that. And I really like his approach to like how he has a set of like questions and a set of things that he's gonna be answering. Yeah, and then the point that this took 16 years to compile and he even had more stuff planned. Just goes to show how we will never know the full truth of our people's history, but it's best to take what we know and learn from it to deal with this problem.
Oh, sorry, did I
No, no, you're perfect.
I thought by reading this preview, there was one thing that stuck out to me, and he mentioned on page 31 that this is what he said. This is why I urge those students who intend to accept the great challenge of basic research in this discipline to go into the enemy territory. I enjoyed how he wants us to know that even with these white supremacists trying to, or have been how they changed our history and changed it to their narrative, you can still pull out truths in that. And to what I keep saying 0526, I don't know if I should say your name that way, but I agree with you on how, how he said it took 16 years for him to do this project and do all the research. What's saddening to me is how he mentions on 27 that his research project, like his, should have taken highly trained experts from history, archaeology, anthropology, medicine, linguistics, tropical agriculture, political science. And it's sad because I just wish that we as a people could be more involved in those types of fields and basically make this change it from the white narrative to the Black narrative, in which lies the truth. Because I've done some research on archaeology, actually, because I was looking into doing that, and across the globe, I saw that there's a lot of cases against different schools on the racism in archaeology. I mean, even in anthropology, all of it. So it would just be a dream if we can encourage our fellow people to be involved in these fields so that we can help one another unearth more truth than we already have. So I'm looking forward to this, and all kudos to him for doing all the work that he could do with what he has here. I mean, he did the best he could.
Well said. I can go now. Oh, it just lines me up so great. That's actually similar to what I took out of it as well. My quick little summary is that from the reading, there has been like this erase, as we have mentioned, of like Black history, well, especially like prehistory, like before colonization. And there's not enough like Black historians or philosophers from that time to provide that to us. So there's like this lack in the areas. And then also there's not enough like people in the ally areas of research, such as like the ones mentioned in the book. And it's important that we continue to document, and before, as we're reading, to push like this migration of Black people, especially migrating to like Asia and Egypt, and creating that like lineage or genealogy to move forward and to help us again like fight this white supremacy now. And also we must like they call it, I say decolonize, but they call it decaucasianize or decaucasianize. I believe that's what the word was in the textbook. In the book. And we also must teach like Black people again, like the prehistory and roots of their existence, because I feel like not only do like people, quote unquote, who call themselves like Egyptian or Asian or these other cultures, or they don't, or ethnic groups, they don't understand like who they are, as well as like Black people don't understand who they are also from this genealogy or this pathway and migration sense. And I think that's too, after reading this, I hope while reading this book or after reading this book, I kind of see this, how this kind of like disconnection happens between like quote unquote Black Americans and quote unquote Africans. How this disruption happens to where Africans or Black Americans kind of just like, oh, well, I'm Black American, you know, African American, and I'm not like tied to Africa, because there's some people who believe that. And that's due to like obviously the European history European history that taught Black people about themselves, which was false, obviously. But so I'm very interested to see and tie all the knots or tie all everything together.
Thank you. Well said. Everybody has said some great things and all things that I wanted to touch on myself. For me, I enjoyed really how he really breaks down how he does the study. So, we were able to follow along, and we also know, how credible it is. He mentioned in there that, written versus oral history, he said something along the lines of, like, none of those should be, be seen as truth unless they're verified. And I thought that was very important, because like Ash said, oral history a lot of times is, looked down upon, and written history is favored. Another thing that really jumped out to me is what Ben was saying about the mulattoes. I thought that was kind of mind-blowing for me. And it honestly explains a lot that, on the other side of the planet, that these people who, to us would be classified as non-white, but, over there and on that side of the planet, they're considered white. And that was, mind-blowing. It honestly took me a couple minutes to grasp, because I don't know, that just never occurred to me. Let me see. I'm sorry, let me get my notes out. I had written. It also got me thinking about, because he talks about maybe some of the problems and maybe areas of other research, and I thought about a Urugu a lot, and I'm like, maybe a Urugu for Islam can be done, something along the lines of that. I think that something like that could be very useful. Yeah, and like I said, mentioned earlier too, I'm looking forward to, actually hearing history from actual Africans and not from the viewpoint of the conquerors. So I thought that was very important, something that he also emphasized in that preview, that's what was being done here. I think Ezra's the only person that needs to go.
Yeah. Can we repeat the question one more time?
It's just a concise and quick summary of some things that you took away from the preview.
I see. Okay. Well, I definitely gave most of that in my opening statement, unfortunately. But yeah, just like most of you guys were saying, there's definitely a lot of stuff to take from this. I will say, the most interesting thing for me, at least, was definitely, the Asian culture. Just to see, because I feel like when it comes to Asian society and African civilization and stuff like that, there's some sort of just blank in history. So I was definitely glad to hear that Chancellor Williams would definitely be talking about that throughout the duration of the book. I mean, there's so many things that I really did find interesting, to be honest, but that was definitely one of the biggest things that stood out for me. And also, like Zeke was saying, me and Zeke were listening to the audiobook while reading along, and it did take us quite a couple of minutes to actually comprehend, what they were saying about, the white Arabs and Black Africans. So it's just very crazy to see, the levels of confusion, the years and years of confusion, and just the way it's been built to reinforce itself, to always, come back to it. So it's like a checks, what do they call it? A check system, I guess, kind of like the federal government, US Senate, all that stuff. So very interesting stuff. Yeah, that's for me.
Thanks so much. Very well said. So yeah, Chancellor really brings up a lot of great questions, and hopefully these questions allow us to become more whole, I guess, whatever that means, in a spiritual way or a metaphysical way. And I feel like a lot of Black people and non-white people on planet Earth do often wonder what happened. You know, how did Black people, you know, fall to the bottom of the barrel, as 0526 said earlier. And on page 18, I wanted to read this, and it reads, "The big unanswered question then was what had happened? How was the highly advanced Black civilization so completely destroyed that its people in our times and for some centuries past have found themselves not only behind other peoples of the world, but as well themselves, but as well the color of their skin a sign of inferiority, bad luck, and the badge of the slave, whether bond or free." So, has anyone else in this chat, this discussion, ever thought about what happened to quote unquote Black people? I know I used to always, you know, ponder that thought when I was I could even think back to kindergarten and learning about Martin Luther King at an early age and wondering why he had to be murdered and why Black people had to be slaves. Like, what led to these catastrophes is the best word for me right now.
I would have to agree. I've definitely always wondered, you know, even with the books we've been reading today, you know, they do a good job of clearing up the confusion, but still don't answer some of the questions I have about, like, what actually happened, like what caused this, how did we fall, you know? It's one thing to lose a war, but you know, what we're experiencing now, you know, that can't explain it all, you know. There has to be more to it. There has to be an understanding, you know, and he also talks about, you know, the truth, you know, we may not like it, what we might hear, you know. He talked about cannibalism with Africans, and I don't know, you know, that is something, you know, I don't want to believe, but if that's how it is, you know, then so be it. Let the truth be revealed. It only, you know, enlighten us and really paint a clear picture of what was going on and what we need to know.
Yeah, I can totally resonate with both of what's been said today. I have like memories of watching The Mummy Returns and just feeling like, I don't know, I don't think so. Even though I'm from West Africa, Syria, like I always felt like a strong disdain of feeling like Morocco, Algeria, Egypt are all like Arab dominated rather than African dominated. And that's always confused me. And I of course, for me, it looks like long-term invasion, long-term conquering. That's what, I've slowly gathered. But this is going to give us the detail that really lets us know why, so we can learn from the past mistakes and try our best not to repeat it with a different form of application.
Yeah, I think, man, what Schwa shared with this opening was very liberating and relaxing to really learn what really happened. You know, it's just like, okay, I can relax a little bit. You know, it's like the truth will set you free, because I was like onto something. I think like a part of what I thought had happened was just basically that you had a savage people that were given civilization by a civilized people, and then when the savages got a hold to the civilization, they couldn't handle it, and you know, because of their savagery, used it for destruction instead of, and it's just a basic theory, you know, just an idea that kind of common sense over the years, connecting the dots, and it was kind of on the trajectory or the track of what Chancellor Williams is saying, but nowhere close, obviously, to the answers that he's that he's got for us. So I'm really excited and just I'm even getting emotional sitting here. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm like, oh boy.
Thanks so much for sharing. I'm assuming that was all the people who wanted to respond to what I had read.
That's okay. So sorry, I'd just like to say on the following page, page 19, just right after the next paragraph, I thought it would be a good idea for us all to each read out the questions that led Chancellor Williams to write this 16-year-long worth research for us to be able to dissect. Does everybody have like the book in front of them?
No, I'm gonna share it right now. So.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. It's like the second paragraph of page 19.
I know. I have that written down too.
And like each question that we read, I think there's enough questions for how many of us are here. Can we like take a stab at answering just like in a brief paragraph or sentence how just trying to answer the question that we're going to be able to unfold later through Chancellor's research. I'll go first. So the question is, sorry.
Wait, can we start with my research was a quest too? Can you start with that?
Of course.
Yeah.
My research was for some specific answer to a very specific question. Some of these were, how did all Black Egypt become all white Egypt? My answer to this would probably be conquering, invasion, slow trading, marriages, and then take over. And then just that cycle continuing.
Number 2, what were some of the specific details in the process that so completely blotted out the achievements of the African race from the annals of history? Just how could this be done on such a universal scale? My answer to this question is academia and like having basically all areas of the people activity having a goal of telling the world that Black people were, savages and uncivilized, and hiding the true accomplishments of Africa. And I think some of the people at the forefront of that were the philosophers and the religious leaders who were indoctrinating all the people to the white supremacist mindset via their philosophy. So like people such as Plato and Aristotle, and then of course we've learned about the devilish acts of our religions, such as Christianity, Catholicism, and even Islam. They all play a role in corroding the image of Black people, and also, hiding the truth of where they come from and what they've accomplished.
Okay, I'll read sorry. Oh, can I read the next one?
Yes, please.
Okay, how and under what circumstances did Africans, among the very first people to invent writing, lose this art almost completely? I think the answer to that question is through centuries of force, through centuries by force of having to do things the way the white man wants it to be done, relearning and getting rid of all the creativity that we had prior to them doing what they've done to us, has made it so that it seems as though we have lost those things. I don't know. I still think that we have our, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of stuck on that one. I mean, I do believe that through force, we've been forced to change the way we do things on a more spiritual, natural level because of the fear of being tortured and beaten and scrutinized and so forth and so on. Yeah, that would be my answer. But I'm still trying to figure it out at the same time.
I'd like to give a crack at the third one as well. I had a different interpretation of that one. If that's okay. I'd also like to read the next one. But I would see. I agree with some of what V was saying. I just wanted to add, you know, because he kind of talks about it, about them having to roam and wander around and to escape enslavement. So it makes me think, you know, they didn't have. Maybe it was for purpose of not being like tracked, so they have to do everything orally. You know, they didn't have places to really write, you know, like on the stone that they were doing before that. So that's my hypothesis. But for the fourth one, is there a single African race, one African people? I would believe so. I would have to say yes. Maybe they're just all scattered throughout Africa, you know, being in hotter climates and colder climates and, you know, environments have maybe, you know, changed their traits and attributes. But I would still suggest that there is a single African race and one African people.
Can I comment? Were you done?
Yeah, I was gonna popcorn somebody. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, can I comment just briefly on the other ones? Can we do that? It's just this on the first one. It's a brainwashing. Huh?
Oh no, I was saying, yeah, that's fine. We should be able to discuss the questions, definitely.
Okay. So how did all blacks become white? They didn't. It's just a brainwashing that convinced people that they're white, which is very strategically tactful and powerful to convince a person of their own identity. And then the burning of the libraries. And number two, how did they blot out? What were some decisions how did they blot out our achievements by burning libraries and destroying artifacts, like blowing the noses off of the, you know, they attempted to blot it out. And yeah, I agree that there's one African people originally. And what was number five is if we are one race or one people, how do you explain the numerous languages, cultural varieties, and tribal groupings? Well, you know, he explained that in the later writings. So, you know, and that was what was so relaxing to find out just how we got so factioned. And not only factions into smaller splinter groups, how they actually became enemies and fighting over, you know, the resources and for survival. Yeah, and you know, as a result of the invasion of the Asians, you know, pushing them further and further south. Okay, that's it. Who's taking number 6?
I believe we're on number 5, but I'll go ahead and do it again. Or did you read number 5? John?
Yeah, I commented on number 5.
Okay.
If we're one race, how do people explain the numerous languages, cultural varieties, and tribal groupings?
Okay. I'll do number 6.
I can do number 6. So since as it seems to be, to me, there is far more disunity, self-hatred, and mutual antagonism among Blacks than any other people. Is there a historical explanation for this? Europeans. I just think it's due to learning like the white man's history is why there's so much disunity between Black or Africans, Black people, African race, and self-hatred because they're learning something other than themselves, which they're comparing or seeing themselves to something they are not, which continuously shows like this unity, because then they're trying to push themselves to be your quote unquote European. And then that's this continuous divide, because we know from reading Yerugu and other texts that the European ideologies are driven on like individualism and all these other things. So practicing that, there's no way to be unity or be unified.
Beautifully said.
Okay.
Thank you so much for doing that, y'all. Thanks.
It's
Great idea.
There's still one more.
There's one more.
Oh, some more?
yeah, more.
In puzzling contrast is the undying love of Blacks for their Europeans and Asian conquerors and enslaved explained, and how in puzzling contrast is the undying love of Blacks for their Europeans and Asian conquerors and enslavers explained. Undying love of Blacks for the European Asian conquerors.
Stockholm syndrome.
If you're able to convince a person that they are inferior, absolutely inferior, and then reinforce that in various ways with violence, and also you make that people dependent on you through enslavement and other forces, over time you can convince them that you are superior to them, and so you will aspire to be like them. So it's I think it's a double thing. It's a gaslighting. You know, you're the savage. When the savage calls the savage, and he becomes the savage and accepts that. And then what Mary just said, the Stockholm syndrome kicks in. It's twofold. Convince the people that they're savage, not completely human, less than, and that you need to aspire to be like us.
So essentially, like just brainwashing them, brainwashing us by way of TV, keep promoting beauty standards as something other than what Black people look like, just sheer brainwashing over and over again. Yeah.
And reinforce, and even before, even during colonial, and even during the time of the Great Migrations, when all of this was going down, they showed up with red suits and shiny boots and gold shiny buttons and hats, and had this web bottom with this strange thing that appeared to be superior, something new and different, when in fact it was inferior, because it was all show, all facade, all outside, all physical, all material, all right brain, no spirituality, no morality. You can't have civilization without morality and spirituality. So they took the technology without the spirituality and the morality. And now all we care about is money. except us, except the woke folk.
Very well said, Ben. I totally agree. So I wanted to read something that stuck out to me on page 20. And I think V read this during her summary, but I still think reading it again could be constructive. And it reads, I did not know how very wise this was when a decision was made, for I did not know then that Europe and Asia had been hauling out of Africa over the centuries. Just about all of the historical materials I needed to see and study at the very outset. Certainly I knew from reading all about the rape of Africa, but to know the scale on which this was done, one must see at least some of it in Europe with his own eyes and be amazed. The museums in various cities of the European colonial powers are the repositories of much African history. And I think this is right here is a really great example of someone who is trying to solve a problem and attempting to get information from what has now become a source. I've been to the National History Museum in England, and in the bottom floor, there are a bunch of ancient African pieces of art, tools, books, sculpture, statues, all top of a monument. So it's just occurred to me because it's not well known to the majority of Black people or non-White people what's happening and what's continuing going on, like the brainwashing that was mentioned. That's not normal talk. That's not normal conversations. Like, there aren't many people who are what I would say solutionists, people who want to solve problems. People who are anti-racist and anti-this, anti-that, but to actually counter something and scientifically try to solve a problem requires one to do such things like traveling. And if we don't have the necessary energy to travel or the funds to travel, you could just read, because that's another way to travel, metaphysically speaking. And does anyone have anything on pages 20 to 25 that they want to discuss? If not, I'm going to jump to 25 and read something that I had noted down.
Yeah, on 21.
I had something on page 21 I wanted to share and discuss. Can I be heard?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll go after.
Okay, so on 21, where he says, from the researcher's viewpoint, the most important part of the investigation was the beginning of the task of singling out and clearly setting forth the precise nature of Africa's own independently developed civilization. A continent-wide study of the traditional customary laws of the Blacks, for example, enabled us to learn for the first time that a single constitutional system prevailed throughout all Black Africa. Just as though the whole race, regardless of the countless patterns, lived under a single government. So I wanted to highlight this part because I read a book on Kwame Nkrumah, and he's the first, for those of you that don't know, he's the first president of Ghana. And he, a lot of stuff that he talked about was, unifying Africa under, one continent. And that's ultimately what led to his demise. The CIA infiltrated Ghana, and the rest was history. But I thought that was very interesting because I didn't think that anything like that had ever existed previously in Africa. So the fact that when he presented it, or at least when I was reading about it, it seemed like something that had never been done before. But it seems like he was just trying to take it back to the right way of how things were done before, colonialism. It was really bad.
Yeah, I agree. That was like the most interesting part to me. The idea that irrespective, like Africa is this huge continent, and yet like you can find just like the roots of all of these governments or so-called governments to be so similar in the way that they function democratically. It's just so crazy to me, like to just think about that, because then it's like there has to be something intrinsic within the people to produce that type of society everywhere on the continent. And I think it's interesting because I've never even heard of anything like that before.
It reminds me of the 13 colonies being established based on the 13 tribes of the Iroquois Nation. They already had, hierarchies and democracy and government established, the native, the indigenous people of this land. And so it's pretty similar, how they did it in Africa and how they did it here. Can I just, this is really.
Oh wait, I would like to push back on that, because like reading Yorugu, I think the rhetoric is similar, but like the actual structures of their societies, like a lot of people say like, oh, all of these, they got everything from like Africa, but I think they got the rhetoric of it in terms of like, this is what we'll say where the society is functioning as, but I don't think their actual society were ever functioning in that way, in terms of like democratically structured, in terms of like a representative government. I don't think Europe or America has ever really had that.
Got you. They bastardized it. I got you. I agree. For this is so important that I think it's on page 19. I know we've moved ahead, but it's at the top up here where he says,
if you moved ahead, if you could always read whatever people want to read, it's totally fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was convinced that what troubled me and what I wanted to know was what troubled the Black masses and what they wanted to know. We wanted to know the whole truth, good and bad, for it would be continuing degradation of African people if we simply destroyed the present system of racial lies embedded in world literature, only to replace it with glorified fiction based more on wishful thinking than on the labors of historical research. And just to reemphasize just how much I appreciate what he's doing and the example that he's setting. And I think it's up to you, your generation. You're the future historians that Chancellor Williams is talking about to complete this work right here.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to add to the section that I read about. So with the single government, so nothing like that had, at least I thought nothing like that had ever existed. And in current news recently, it seems like Africa is moving towards that single government again. That's why I tell people, you kind of have to be on the lookout for these white supremacists, and really the reactions. I think a lot of stuff is going to be happening this year, but Africa, they had a trade deal that began this earlier this year, which allows free trade between all African countries, something that's never been done, but I guess something that has been done, but is being brought back. And I read another article today saying that all Africa was going to be using a single passport. So now all African countries are under one single passport. And it seems like they're moving closer and closer back to that single African government, at least in some aspects.
That sounds legendary. I need to do some research. I thought it was going to be like regional, like West Africa, East Africa, South, but if it's just one universal passport, that's even better.
Yeah, it's supposed to be for all all African countries are just going to have one single passport, and it's supposed to encourage intercultural, intertourism, you know, really getting Africans, you know, able to see in other parts of Africa, not being, you know, segregated to one specific area. Very good stuff.
That's a phenomenal move, because we are so riddled on the most colonial countries. You want to travel to the second you're educated. From my experience, I see that they want to travel to the country that they're speaking. If it's English, they want to. If there was the English that colonized them, they want to move to England. If it was France that colonized them, they want to go to France, and that's what you find across the diaspora. Most of us here are the offspring of colonized countries that wanted to come here. And if that was put into practice how many years ago, you never know. Like we could have been children growing up in Egypt, Niger, just central parts of Africa. So I think this is an important way to also encourage speaking other languages other than English across country.
Definitely. And it's also supposed to help aid in the development, because, you know, if my neighbor, you know, if we have these kind of relationships, we're going to help each other out and develop our countries up and our people up. So very exciting. You know, you guys keep your eye out for that kind of stuff.
I like I really appreciate a lot of the Chancellor Williams' diction, like going back to page, I believe it's around page 19. He says, but the Black historian, member of a race under perpetual siege and fighting an almost invisible war for survival, dare not follow in these footsteps of the master. I thought that was pretty profound, because a large majority of good meaning Black people have made the mistake of following in the footsteps of their masters, leading only to further confusion and harm. I really also appreciated this part from page 25, which I'm sure we all can relate to. And he says, the second great tragedy is in the nature of what is called education. It is mainly rote learning, the ability to memorize phrases, concepts, and other required data. Thinking is neither required nor expected. Critical analysis and evaluation of subject matter are not required, but the ability to absorb and recall is required. The brilliant scholar, then, is one who can readily quote authorities and remember well his bibliographical sources. So we have a generation of Black scholars who continue to amaze students by mouthing the doctrines and viewpoints of their white teachers like so many robots without minds of their own. So I think this problem has only ramped up under the system of race and white supremacy. But shout out to Chancellor Williams for being aware and very brave to partake in this book.
Thanks so
I
much.
totally agree with that, Swal. Like I literally will have conversations with people and they'll just regurgitate history without any analysis or having any sort of theme behind what they're trying to say or point. And it's literally just look how much I have memorized and how much I know. And I just think it's such a product of our education system. And then once you go to college, they expect you to have opinions, but those opinions still have to line up with whatever, memorization you've been forced to take on as a young child. And so I just think that that part was also really powerful, because it forces a lot of people to not be interested in understanding their own history, if it's just rote learning and memorization. And it also forces people to not be critical thinkers. And so many people are just not critical thinkers at all.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Ash, because even for myself, now, I'm 35 now, and I'm just now wanting to know more and asking questions. And I would say, yes, it's because of, the school system here. I remember when I did ask questions when I was younger, just, out of just being young and didn't know, it was look down upon. Don't ask any questions. Don't question this. Just listen to read the books, and the books will tell you the answers. And I almost felt like it made me dumb.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that. I definitely felt some type of way reading that. I think, I'm in favor of like education and learning, but definitely took me a while to understand that, that's all memorization. I've known that for a while, but what does that actually look like? I think he gave me a very good description of what, I need to be doing and what I should actually be considered an education and learning. It's not this, memorizing, regurgitating, but actually thinking like, does this stuff make sense? How did that happen? Asking those kind of questions. It's not just, that's what happened in history. And then, just telling somebody, repeating that exact same thing. And that's nothing, it doesn't, nobody learns anything from doing that.
Yeah, thanks so much for reading that, Swat. I just wanted to read the paragraph above that because I also think is important. And it just shows the devastating effect of education and academia when it comes to Black minds. It really corrodes self-perception and self-respect. And I think when Black people are educated and non-white people are educated in Western education systems, it really teaches them how to hate themselves and teaches them how to either ascend to whiteness or to be okay with being an inferior entity. So on page 25, it reads, the first tragedy to note about the effects of this class education on Blacks is that it further reinforces colonialism's policy of perpetual disunity in Africa and elsewhere. The line dividing these Blacks, upper and middle classes, from the Black masses and their basic aspirations is more rigidly drawn. And this superior class mentality becoming even more crystallized since independence is an almost certain guarantee of future uprisings on a scale never seen. I think I think it's true. Not sure what that uprising is going to be or how it's going to manifest in these conditions, but I thought that was interesting.
Can I read the paragraph before that? Were you done?
Yeah, I was done.
This paragraph right before that ties into what Mary and Zeke were talking about.
Yeah.
Where it says the philosophy of education fitted ideally with the Africans from the continent and elsewhere who, unlike JL, came to Europe from a privileged class. Some of those studying in England became more British than the British, just as many what was French West Africa became more French than the Frenchmen. And that was kind of relieving to find out that it's not their fault, because I know some of those British, and I know some of those Black French, French, and it just crystallized for me that that's why they're so damn uppity and have this hierarchical, perception, this outlook. And then the second two paragraphs that Trey just highlighted reminded me of how, like, when you come out of Harvard, you have a Harvard mentality. You are structured and you think like a Harvard person. You're a Yale. Oh, no. You went to Yale, so you're a Yale person. Different. And I can say this about Cal people. There here in Berkeley, there is the thing that says about people that graduated from Cal. For example, this is just one example. They say that people that graduated from Cal always have to be the smartest person in the room. That's what they train you at Cal, And so they come out with the real similar mentalities. in these different structures. And it's very well strategized.
I agree, and I can concur that Berkeley does inflate one's ego and does indoctrinate a perception where you do intellectually feel superior to other people, or you need to be superior to other people intellectually. Really toxic environment, and constantly shedding those attributes.
I can totally relate to everything that's been said. I highly recommend what Ashley said about the recall that is taught to you as opposed to thinking. But I had jotted some notes down for that as well, and I wrote directly. Thinking is not required; just absorb and recall. It's like a robot speaking knowledge. So you just spew your programming that's been given to you or socialized to you, as opposed to teaching you to, in the way that you were taught to critically think, because that's, especially in England, that was not a concept until I'd say university. Like at school, it was opinions, English so, but it was on the level that I was exposed to it at university, where I was also exposed to anthropology and archaeology, things that were not within our syllabuses in the regions that I was educated in, which is a real big shame for me. But yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that you are socialized into the Sealy of the European. What I also had written down was, because what I remembered about university once I was having to record this information, was the fact that every essay for psychology started, every introduction for psychology started with an introduction of either one of their Greek philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle, you name it. Any topic being introduced in psychology, it had links to Freud, or it had links to somebody within the Greek philosophy or theology, so they could just basically connect that civilization or where this knowledge that we are gaining is from their empire, from their hierarchy, just to further install that power and socialization hierarchy for us.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me of Urugu and Plato, and how it was something along the lines of, by the time people reach these levels, which I imagine is like college and academia, they already think like Plato and how he's supposed to be thinking. So they've already done most of the groundwork, and those people are there for a reason, because they accept those ideologies and those kind of behaviors.
Definitely. It's really funny when you go to when you do go to college or university or any type of higher educational settings. The rhetoric around you is always, I came here to help the world to become a better world. I came here to help people. That's always rhetoric. But when you're at the university, you eventually graduate, and then you just go off to make money. That's what ultimately you were there for in the first place. But we are trained to lie and say we're gonna save the world and do all these things. And most of the people around you, you're a non-white person, they're probably not even gonna like you, because they've been trained already to this point to attack Black, attack non-white. So it's just a big facade, and I agree that just Western teaching is not transformational at all. It's very counterproductive, teaching you to like Chancellor Williams has said, teaching you to memorize, regurgitate, and just program yourself to be robots. And there's something on 26 I wanted to read. And I think this is a great example of why it's okay and possibly a good idea sometimes to learn from Europeans if you are going at it from a way where you are going to take information and decipher the truth from it yourself, or you're going to collect the information and bring it to other people to decode. But it's often hard to hide all of the truth, even if you have a serpent tongue. So it reads, the point here is that these sneering remarks by an eminent British historian revealed to me an entirely new field of research. That lecture led me into the study of one of the most significant developments in the entire history of the Black race. An ancient system of democracy existing before Greece evolved from a continent-wide constitution that governed the whole African people as a single race. This all-important finding was arrived at by comparative studies of African customary laws in every region of the continent. The Europeans were confronted with a real social democracy that existed long before the terms socialism and democracy were invented in the West. Dr. Madden, it was savage because the people were the real rulers, in fact, and not merely in theory. So, like, mind-blowing piece from this book. The first time I ever had learned of a democratic social government being the case for all of Africa, like them having one government, one like social democratic way of doing things, was in this book. And I think it's interesting how he was able to come to a conclusion. He had to do more research afterwards, of course, but he was able to come to a brief conclusion that just by this British instructor making a racist remark, basically, he was able to get useful information that eventually went into his book. So a prime example. And on, so you guys know, I'm just gonna try to get through my notes as quickly as possible. So do jump in if you have things that you wanna read.
Just the paragraph before that.
Go for it, Ben.
How this just blew me away. The British laws which displeased the people would remove it for just as fast as African kings or chiefs undertook to carry out British laws which displeased the people would remove them from office. Therefore, this primitive African democracy had to be destroyed before the British system of indirect rule could be effective. You know, I kind of watched that happen in Uganda, where the British installed Milton Obote before Amin, and because Uganda is one of the few countries that maintained their systems of government, their hierarchical, they had kingdoms already set up before the British. The only way they were able to maintain power in Uganda was to acquiesce, to get the acquiescence of the kings. Not so Uganda has a president and a king. And people don't know, Uganda was never colonized. Ethiopia is not the only country that was never colonized. Uganda wasn't either. They were protectorates, but they were never colonized because of the kingdoms that were already set up. Is that right, Ash?
Thanks so much, Ben. I think that's some great information. Man, I'm just trying to take in like what you have said is really. I need to investigate that further to see how Uganda is doing right now and to see if they're doing a bit better than other African countries. On page 29, there's a great example of white supremacists and white people and people who are against Black people. There's a great example of them trying to stop a Black person from getting knowledge.
I'm sorry, what page, Trey?
29. And I think they're stopping him from getting knowledge because white supremacists are very aware that if Black people actually do collectively reach a certain level of self-respect, things probably would happen that would be non-constructive for white supremacy. So they do a good job at making sure it doesn't happen. And how Black people, one of the ways Black people and non-white people can reach a heightened level of self-respect is through knowledge and through gathering information. So the writer of this book talks about how he was almost prevented from doing his research in parts of South Africa. And I wanted to just read this bit. The Ministry of the Inferior, but this is the outcome. So he was granted access. The Ministry of the Interior reacted swiftly. Not only was permission quickly granted to do field work in the South, but all the necessary arrangements were made with dispatch. This included establishing my southern headquarters at Malacca. The simple fact was that while they were quite familiar with European research people roaming freely all over the country, a Black doing field studies in the Sudan was a phenomenon indeed. And that resonated with me for a number of reasons. Being among the few Black people at the London Film School here in Europe, I often am mistreated and misguided, so I have to always ask a bunch of questions, always make sure I'm getting the right information. And I feel like Chancellor Williams had to do the same thing. He had to ask questions and see why they were refusing him access and call the embassy. So by being somewhat on code and asking questions and, just being attentive to what you're doing now and what you're doing now, what's going to react, what's going to happen next. So understanding what's going to act one, act two. So I thought this would be a good thing to read because it shows you a quasi example of what being on code looks like in a way. So
that part was very interesting. I don't know what they were more afraid of, him finding this history or the fact that he's a simple, like a Black man going through there. Because he said that when, that if he would let them know, he would let other places know that this was the only place that they didn't let an African man come in and do research. I thought that they were like more concerned with their image, right? Than anything. But I do agree he was on code and he was asking questions, and that's very important.
Yeah, thanks for chiming in, Ezekiel. So South Africa. I want to talk about South Africa for a bit. I've never been to South Africa. From what I've learned about it, they had apartheid. Nelson Mandela was murdered doing work on the apartheid situation there.
In prison.
I could be confused. What are you saying, Ben?
In prison.
Yeah, he was in prison. Yeah, and all the research that I have on apartheid is just really, when I think about South Africa, I see a place where white people are in power and Black people are not in power, which is the case for most of the world, if not all of the world. So there is a South African person in my program, And I remember I was talking to him once, and he was complaining about how white South Africans are treated in Africa. And I quote, they were talking about how like, yeah, they get robbed and they get killed a lot out there. And I'm not sure if it's true. I don't think it is, but it just goes to show that whites feel very much entitled to all places in the world, you know, even South Africa. And Chancellor William gives a little glimpse into what the situation is like there in South Africa. And it reads on page 30, finally, South Africa. The situation in this country is so ridiculous that far from allowing myself to be in so I'm gonna start over, sorry. Finally, South Africa. The situation in this country is so ridiculous that far from allowing myself to be incensed with rage, I find it amusing. The unremitting brutality of these whites against the blacks leaves them in a state of permanent fear. They seem to consider every black man not a potential, but an actual threat. And what they are occupied with every hour is unbelievable until you are actually in South Africa. My passport was a mistake made somewhere. I, of course, had no intention to do field work in South Africa, but had to pass through it to reach the surrounded countries then under British rule. No one at all was supposed to be barred from passage to and from these countries, but it required the action of the U.S. ambassador at Pretoria and an angry American consul general at Johannesburg to free me from the airport room where I was held and checked on every 30 minutes. Even when the consul general arrived in person, the authorities insisted that I must not enter the city, but be taken under guard to the train to Swaziland. Mr. Riley, the CG, then decided to defy South Africa, but not only driving me leisurely through Johannesburg, but 200 miles around the country, stopping at different towns, and finally on to Swaziland. It's very, very sad to hear that Black people are in a state of perpetual fear in South Africa. I hope we can solve that problem soon.
No, yeah, when I read that part as well, it was highly like frustrating. But then I look and think about how South Africa have like tried their best to make sure that they are more centerfold, that the new age children who are growing up and have learned from the experiences of the past definitely are making more grounds of a difference. If they could get a hold of this kind of knowledge, maybe the energy and attitude that they're coming forward with can like start moving forward in policy changes. But for now, in terms of like other than COVID, in terms of like organizing amongst themselves for like fashion, I wouldn't say unconstructive because most of them are Black owned, but like they're really developing in terms of small businesses amongst themselves now.
Yeah, I just recently thank you for that.
Yeah, Trey.
I just recently saw a documentary where there is a political party in South Africa that is extremely militant, and I love them. The leader is very outspoken. I forget his name, but he's a young guy, and he has the vast majority of the country, the Black population, behind him. And some of the laws have changed recently, like a lot. I personally think that South Africa is ground zero for the Black revolution and for really Black people. It's ground zero for Black people coming back into power. Um, Thank you, Bobby Wine. I I think that's somewhere else. Anyway, yeah, I think you're right. Um, But for example, for the first time, there's a black gold. I think it's a gold mine. It's a huge mine though, and for the first time, there's a black mine owner. And what tripped me out was that some local laws have changed so that in the documentary there was a white guy saying that he went into Johannesburg to get a job as a cabinet maker and was told, well, no, we can't hire you because you're white. And then there's another another excerpt from it was they're the huge shanty town.
Oh, I've seen this documentary. I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I forget the title of it. It's something, but it's all white shanty town.
Yeah, and I forgot the name too, but it's on YouTube. I'll find it and send it to the group. It shouldn't be hard to find, but I watched it on YouTube.
The title is speaking to us, coming back. The party is over, or something like that. White rule is over, and something like that. So, but yeah,
I feel like South Africa should have never people there at all. Like that should be the final. Like in the 90s when like Nelson Mandela had the opportunity, but I guess he was negotiating. He kind of sold out, to be honest, but I do think that the ultimate solution should have been that they all should have left, personally. Like, I don't think they can function with them there.
And now there's a phenomenon of people going into these white homes and farms and just killing the people, killing the white folks, and taking their house, taking their land. And there's a major land grab going on where Mugabe of Zimbabwe. About the politics there. They are driving the white folks out, and they that's why that now this is something that we can do as Americans, and is fight for the sanctions to be lifted against Zimbabwe, because that's an act of war to invoke sanctions on a country like that, just for those, because those people said, no, we want our land back, we're taking our farms back. And they're taking South Africa's it's a long time coming, but yeah, they're coming back.
Yeah, I remember reading about that in the news somewhere about the president of Zimbabwe basically telling all those white farmers to give those lands back, and it being a huge issue. Some people have been going as far as calling it racism. But thank you for bringing that up, because I think that was relevant information for sure. I don't know much about South Africa and what's going on there currently. I do know that they were having some riots a couple months ago. With that, I think it specifically had to do with Nigerians or something, and they were, killing Nigerians. Let me not do that, because I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask y'all how y'all feel about this part of the book on page 31. I'm going to go ahead and read it. That is why I urge those students who intend to accept the great challenge of basic research in this discipline to go into enemy territory, linger there, study, and critically analyze their lectures and their scholarly writings, for they are some of the most rewarding sources for African history. Precisely because in shrewdly attempting to delete, disguise, or belittle the role of Blacks in world history, they often reveal the opposite of what was intended. They are fruitful sources of unconscious evidence, supplying the very evidence that they thought to suppress, or recording facts that significance of which they were totally ignorant. A fairly good example is the written account of a European explorer to East Africa. He was outraged because he and his part of. Actually, I want to stop there. How do you guys feel about the aspect of investigating Western writers for information on African history or non-white history?
I found it interesting, honestly, but not too surprising because even for my research now, I have to actually go into some of the um, philosopher and researchers who have like quote unquote wrote about Black history, and it's just a hot mess, honestly. But it's like providing insight of the identity that has been created for African American or African people or Black people, and that's where I'm at now is like seeing and comparing what is today like what Black quote unquote identity is, and then referring it or comparing it to what the white man said, and obviously it's like almost identical because they have like infiltrated or pushed their identity of Black people's or Black people identity onto all of us. So it's just I feel like it has to kind of like to be very well versed, especially researching the topic. It's important to research the opponent, if you will, or the opposite. And I think it's very important to not be just one-sided because you might find some insight in there. I found a lot of great things who have referred to like they'll bash someone in their research, like, oh, this person said this. So then I have to go to it and it's actually truth there to like the other person. So it's very interesting. I think it's important to look at both sides. And then obviously with a critical eye, don't go in there and say, oh, I'm going to take this and believe it, because we are obviously here on the path and here to do a certain mission. So I think it's bringing that mission and looking at the other ones too, and take what you can through a critical lens.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ray. Thanks for sharing. And this part literally coincides with what you just said. It's on page 32. Um, and it reads, in particular, we should seek out those works with the special mission to prove the superiority of whites by proving the inferiority of blacks, all in language so subtle, scholarly, and scientific, that to the uncritical mind, their truth seems self-evident. But it is also noteworthy that while the most hostile racist writers usually prove the very opposite of what they intended, their works inevitably contain useful factual data that must be accepted. Indeed, it is doubtful whether anyone, even a devil, could write a book completely devoid of truth. Love that part. Have to get it in the recording. But yeah, also, yeah, it's hard to only tell lies. That's why I think why I think the subconscious mind comes in. The subconscious mind leaves the conscious mouth, the open mouth. So a really concise and easy definition of this. Example of this is the show Game of Thrones. I think the writer wasn't really sure what he was actually doing when he was creating the creatures. But the most evil creatures in Game of Thrones are called White Walkers, and they have ghastly, pale skin and deep blue eyes, and they literally travel the world and destroy everything. And whoever they destroy, they touch them and make them of their image. So that's literally what Europeans do. They go around destroying people and then indoctrinating them into their Western civilization. So to me, that's just an example of how the subconscious mind works. I could be wrong. Maybe he really wanted to just show, his interpretation of Western civilization. I'm not gonna get into it here, but thought I should share that.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
Sorry. Just to add the one thing I wanted to mention too, like especially going into researching like the opposite or the European side of everything, it's important too for our mission today, obviously, is because like most of the time when someone has a question or someone is like quote unquote spitting facts, European facts, they're almost like reading something that they don't know much about. So if we know about it and what they say, it's easier for us to make sense of what our information, because they're gonna try to, I don't want to use the word argue, but argue what the European has said. And it's just like if we don't know what the European is saying or has said, then it kind of seems like we don't really know the information at all.
Yeah, I wanted to add relevant to the question about him, basically saying African, Black people need to go into these universities and these places and learn about African history through, the Europeans' eyes. I just, I think I do agree with him, but I think it definitely calls for a special kind of person to be able to do that, because I feel like what we're seeing today is we do see a lot of people, going, and a lot of Black people going to these universities and learning from them, but then they come back and some of them are dumber than when they left. They come back, marrying white women. They come back, going to Europe and not really coming back to contribute to their communities. So I think what he's asking for is definitely something that we should be striving and doing, but it definitely takes somebody like Ray was saying, that actually knows, right? And it's like probably previously trained to see this deceit and understand this deceit and to be able to identify and avoid it.
I would agree with that, definitely. To piggyback off of what Kweku said, I think you have to be completely dedicated to extract all this information and still remain strong and not waver and just go off to the white folks and be with them and marry them and all these different things. You have to completely be dedicated to the mission, for sure.
I totally agree. I feel like you have to go in already having that perspective of knowing the end goal and having that deciphering tool, which is what these books are doing for us. And I think Dr. Marimba Annie said it in her book, where by studying the European, they're telling on themselves in the academia, in their hate or in their minimizing, they tell on themselves, and then it can give you an avenue to go and research further. So like, yeah, I really resonate with what you said, Ray, because it's not just studying them for the sake of having the knowledge to discredit them in an argument with in a universal European debate, being aware of everything that's out there is important. To say that it's not that we just don't know it, it's that we know it, we discredit it, and here's the truth.
Thank you so much.
I think
this one.
I think also what Trey said is that like what Trey quoted, that it's even hard for devils to
Lie.
yeah to only lie. I think that goes back to what Dr.Frances Cress Welsing says about the truth and how like the truth begs to be revealed. So, and us melanated folks have the ability to decode the truth. So I really I agree. To answer Trey's question, I agree to what Chancellor Williams has said. It's really rewarding and entertaining to learn the truth from the European through their lies and their deceit, if you're able to decode it properly. Like the part where like from page 31, the where he's explaining like the king. I'll read some of it. The explorer would have been surprised to know that one, king in African, it meant something entirely different from what it meant in Europe and Asia. Two, that this black king, far from putting on airs, did not have the right to receive them, even socially, without the presence of at least three senior elders. Three, that to consider a petition to conduct explorations in the country, the full council of the state had to be called, and that this could be not done by the king without the advice of the first minister who happened to be on the tour when the explorers arrived on the capital. And 4, that the old blacks they saw wandering in from the countryside and immediately given audience were the counselors who had been summoned some distance from some distant province to pass on their request to explore. So he's just decoding how this arrogant experience account given by white people of how they were being treated and having had to be waited on by black people or whatever is actually like a part of like their culture and like part of like their ancient like traditions and stuff. So without being able to decode that, we just think that we would just believe these this account given by these explorers, white explorers. If that makes sense.
No, what Rose said makes perfect sense to me.
I mean, that was crystal clear. That was crystal clear. So I'm really glad you went back to that. I just right quick want to just chime in on what Trey said, the example that he used in the Game of Thrones, and also how this society is obsessed with vampires and the story of vampires, and it's a similar kind of thing with the touching of the people and making them like you. And we live in a society of vampires, and also that the most compelling lies contain a great deal of truth. And I think that they have exploited that. And I hate to go all the way back because we already passed this, but it took me back to this right here on page 23, that where he says the unthinking Muslim or Christian would likely believe that his religion is being attacked rather than those conquerors and enslavers who disgraced it in covering their drive for wealth and world domination. And that at the end of the day, that's what this contumacious plot to destroy the history of the blacks and to place themselves in superiority, as simple as that, for world domination and control at the end of the day.
Right? Well said, well read.
Mhm.
I wanted us to do another reading activity together. So I'll share my screen again. And I have wrote in my notes that it would be a good idea for us to read the theoretical framework together. I'm not sure how many are here. So we'll just read it until we run out. So whoever wants to read, just read after the person who stops. And I'll go ahead and start. And if you have a book that you want to read instead of the screen, that's on page 33. But I'll just go ahead and start. Theoretical framework. Over the years of studying African history, certain propositions and theories evolved quite naturally as guiding headlights in the explorations. A few of them are said here, some previously stated or implied. 1. That Africa, all Africa, is a native homeland of the blacks, and that the Asiatic peoples who occupied North and Eastern Africa, even though they may have been there for centuries, are no more natives Africans than are the Dutch and the British, who likewise occupy and control the southern regions of the continent. The question of where the homelands are from, which ill of these invaders came, is not debatable.
Blacks were among the very earliest builders of a great civilization on this planet, including the development of writing, sciences, engineering, medicine, architecture, religion, and the fine arts. 3. The story of how such an advanced civilization was lost is one of the greatest and most tragic in the history of mankind and should be the main focus of research studies in African history.
Asian imperialism through rarely ever mentioned was and still is even more devastating for African people than that of either European or America. The Arabs, white supremacy superiority complex is not one whit less than that of the European or America, although the strategy of brotherhood deceives naive blacks.
5. The forces behind the continuous splintering of small groups and even the breaking up of kingdoms and empires, followed by the equality endless migrations, included a steadily increasing depth of the soil and the advance of the deserts, drying up of lakes and rivers, along with the attending change of the climate and the always certain internal strife, all combined with invasions and famine to become a way of life. The strength and greatness of the African people can be measured by how, in the face of what at time seemed to be all the forces of hell, they fought through it all to survive and rebuild kingdoms and empires, some of which endured 1,000 years. Seven.
Sorry, I can read it. Swap. 7, within the framework of even the smallest surviving states, the basic principles of the traditional African constitution were adhered to and kept alive throughout all the pairing centuries, I think that's passing centuries, as the fundamental elements of ancient democratic, social, political, and economic systems all over the continent. 8, Africa was the cradle of a religious civilization based on the conception of the supreme God, creator of the universe. This belief in one supreme being antedated that of the Jews by several thousand years before Abraham, and the role of the numerous sub-deities on, I'm reading from the screen. Sub-deities on whom Western writers dwell was exactly the same as that of patron saints in the Christian world. I advance further the theory that the early wandering Hebrews, so numerous in Africa, received many of their religious ideas in Africa, for there it was that Abraham sojourned, Moses was born, Joseph lived, and some of the early years of Jesus Christ were spent. There is no question that even centuries after mulattoes and Asians emerged as the only Egyptians, they still regarded Black Africa as a chief source of the spiritual, the land of the gods, or the land of the spirits.
Notwithstanding the remarkable civilization that developed even millenniums before Christ and the amazing rebuilding of empires in spite of the great dispersions, notwithstanding all of this, African people fell far behind in the forward march of the rest of the mankind because, in addition to the destructive forces of nature on the continent and the hostile force from without, they, the African people, further enshackled themselves with their own hands through certain aspects of their social institutions and beliefs that stood as roadblocks to progress, even where conditions were favorable.
Thank y'all so much for reading. I just think he goes to great efforts to conceptualize what is going on within Black civilization, African civilization. I thought reading his theoretical framework would be constructive. Does anything stand out that people want to share?
Particularly just that part that we read. It kind of so they talk about nature. I'm sure he'll go more in depth, but he talks about, the conditions, that kind of caused, or not caused, but, helped create the problems that Africans faced. You know, it's very interesting, you know, when you think about the white man and him in his caves and how he came out of there just pissed off at the world and ready to conquer everything, and the approach that Africans took. I think there's a difference in there that should be noted, that, you know, after all of that, you know, Africans, you know, didn't blame the world or anybody else. At least that's my interpretation of that.
Yeah, also I liked and appreciated the awareness given that even though like Africans came close to extinctions multiple times, we're still able to rebuild civilizations that lasted for a very long time. And also, like, this is my first time, and I'm sure a lot of other people's here first time understanding like nature playing a huge factor into like the splintering and decimation of Black people in history.
Yeah, I thought the part about the Asian imperialism was super interesting. Because I just watched a documentary that talked about Indian people in Tanzania and how they own like a majority of like the economy there, and how Indian people, like, I think Idi Amin, he set out to like basically like remove all Indian people um, when he came into power. So I just thought that that was like really, really interesting because I think that it's very downplayed the amount that not, I mean, here they're talking about Arabs, but I think the Asian continent in general as an exploitator of like Africa.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Ashley. And especially that one rang out to me the most, the Asian imperialism, especially that statement about the Arabs' white superiority complex is not one whit less than that of the European in America. I think about the attitude of that superiority complex taking place in like Libya, Algeria, and how it was after Gaddafi had died, it went to a state of lawlessness, and they had restarted modern like slavery again, like selling the Black Africans who were trying to migrate and go across, like dropping tar and oil on their backs, just in complete disrespect and disrespect and torture, and being captured and being held for ransom just because they were crossing the borders, not because like they were in trouble. They were just in the wrong. They were just like going through a lawless part of town, and a lot of these racist tendencies were being like, able to being orchestrated because they had no control over their whatever's going on in Libya, and it's still going on, and it's really and it's this imprint and this mentality and this guise of brotherhood through Islam, and we're all one. Like I come from a family who is like half Muslim, half Christian. I'm a Muslim. The Muslim side of my family, I have seen the indoctrination. I see how we was able to keep some parts of our culture, but I also see how there is this superiority complex around Arabian culture, and they don't aim to separate what's Arabian culture versus what is Islam or what is Muslim. And the lines are very blurred, and unless you're trying to pay attention, you'd be a blind follower and accept them as your rule of thumb or leader, or just accept the superiority behaviors that exist in the social groups in the mosque. And then I can't stand it, and I can't wait to further read on and exactly how violent they have been through religion.
I agree. And I think it's really interesting that people who were also colonized by white countries still hate and like exploit Black people. It, but the Black people have no friends, so it makes sense.
None whatsoever. Every Black person should be aware of that. That person that you're singing with, and he's calling you the nigga as you sing the song together, that person's not your friend. Just so you know that.
I think. Oh, so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you didn't. You didn't. Please continue.
To elaborate on that, what Ash just said, like we have no friends. I believe John Henry Clark say that? I believe he said we had no friends. He has this whole
I
thing
think
on
it's
YouTube.
Chancellor Williams.
Yeah, it was Chancellor Williams.
Oh, he said it too. Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I know John Henry Clark had mentioned the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure it's been reiterated as it should be over and over. Yeah. Neely Fuller has also brought that to our attention, that reality.
No friends or allies. I wanted to bring up something that had happened today, and it kind of coincides with the reading. So before I actually sat down to read this preview, I was doing some online gaming, and I had met this person from Texas, and I just try to ask people questions no matter what I'm doing. So I asked him, like, what's going on in Texas? How are things there? And he was a white male. He says things are pretty bad, but I'm not worried. I got AR-15, 2 Glock pistols, a shotgun. And he just started listing all the guns that he had, you know. And he also mentioned a potential, like, race war. You know, this is already, I recorded all this information just to have it, because one of the reasons why I ask people questions while playing these violent video games. And on page 36, it reads, they simply ignore and refuse to publish any facts of African history that upset or even tend to upset their racial philosophy that rests so solidly on premises sanctified by time that they no longer need to be openly proclaimed. They are unwittingly promoting the steady march towards a world conflict between the races. Yet they are doing what they feel they must do in faithful obedience to their Caucasian culture, the racial pattern which emerged in the 17th century, the steady conquest and enslavement of a whole people made it imperative to create both a religious and a scientific doctrine to assuage the white conscience. Their phenomenal success in the industrial world at once supports and justifies their philosophy, the supremacy of the fittest. The danger now arises from an entirely new and unexpected development, a sleeping and submissive non-white world. While all this white power was being amassed, is no longer either sleeping or submissive. Profound stuff, and I think if you even in mass media culture and mainstream news, like that race war, the Civil War, whatever you want to call it, that has been mentioned a lot in recent times. But I just want to remind everyone in the group that slavery was the start of the transatlantic slave trade. Could be also called the transatlantic war against Black people. I do believe that there is a war being waged against Black people, and maybe even not white people as a whole, but I do know specifically um, Black people are engaged in warfare at the moment. And many of them are just casualties and victims and not really participants, because there's very few counter-racist scientists, there's very few people who are learning, hey, I'm under attack 24/7, 365, days a year. Anyone ever hear of the term boogaloo? But that's the sometimes when white supremacists get together, they chant that word together. They chant
You broke up. You broke up. What's the term?
boogaloo.
Oh, boogaloo.
Yeah, so boogaloo could be decoded in the white supremacist construct of meaning race war. So you could look at videos of and people in 2020, chanting boogaloo boogaloo, meaning race war. So, and also even at the recent Capitol storming, a lot of these white males had black T-shirts that said Civil War on it. So things are developing, and they're not developing for the better. I just wanted to get that on everyone's minds.
Yeah. Also, in juxtaposition to actual, along with saying boogaloo, they also have their famous 14 words, which is like the reason for their so-called race war, at least for the outspoken white supremacists, and it's we must ensure a future for white children, or something like that. And that goes hand in hand with race and white supremacy. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's theory on white and why racism is here, which is to prevent white genetic annihilation. So if you have a bunch of white people saying, "Hey, we must ensure a future for white children," maybe there's some huge truth in Dr. Frances Cress Welsing theories and how real this system is, and how serious white people are in maintaining it.
Thanks a lot for sharing that. Um, there's a bit on page, also on page 36. I think it'll be constructive to read as well. It says, and the continuing crusade to control the minds of Blacks through the nature of their education. American and British scholars lead. They are ruthless and aggressive in their scholarly pursuits on races and their co-partners in seizing and controlling the wealth and peoples of other lands. Having established strong national and international African associations and journals that attempt to control research activities of Africa, they proceeded to flood the world with hastily thrown together African histories, pamphlets, and publications on just about everything, every subject that could stand a Black title. Just an example of misinformation and causing confusion, and one of the reasons why so much information is wrong, our lies are just unaccessible. I thought that would be
Yeah, for me that explains a lot, because how would the white supremacists ruling the world let African people enlighten themselves with their histories, right? But it makes sense because they're the ones producing it and controlling it. So they get to create the narratives and they get to tell people exactly what you need to know or what we want you to know. So it makes a lot of sense as to why even though we have all these publications, all these journals, why there's still so much confusion still about what our actual history is, because the white supremacist controls those. And, Black people are naive in thinking that they actually control those institutions and those journals.
The Trans-African Forum, that was a very popular mainstream, well, not mainstream, but Randall Robinson. I don't know if you're familiar with and he was a Pan-Africanist that was actually, if I get it right, attacked so much that he actually gave up his citizenship and moved to Martinique in the Caribbean. And so when we do pursue this and continue this, be ready to be attacked, and I love, just to backtrack a little bit, number 3, we got to read that. Even the African revolt against colonialism and the worldwide challenge to white domination of the entire earth. Even this is on page 36, number 3. Even these signals of change do not disturb these scholars of imperialism. They represent the lords of the earth, controlling all levels of education, science, and research. The education of blacks throughout the world. They control the education of blacks throughout the world. Therefore, they see no need, even in the 80s, to take a new look at the history of blacks from its beginning and start the work of restoring the pages that they earlier deleted and ignored. So the war continues.
Yeah, he talks about how they know this history and they know these things, and they, like you said, they have no intentions of, correcting them or, exposing Black people to these histories or these truths.
Very well said. Sorry, it's saying
Yeah, it's purposely suppressed and just if called pseudoscience if any attempt is made to like research the truth.
very. Everyone's making just great points. I think this has been such a constructive conversation so far, and there's something on page 38 that really stuck out to me. I'm going to go ahead and read it. And it says, as a direct result of the continued universal enslavement through education, Black youth are in revolt. That revolt will become increasingly dangerous as they realize how completely they are blocked from self-realization and the very institution that should further it. How difficult it is to find suitable textbooks in Black history, or even Negro teachers who do not limit themselves to the viewpoints of white masters who trained them. The frustrations become more intolerable as the young find themselves between two fires: the white racists who determine the very nature of their education, and the Negro educators who also see the world through the blue eyes of the Saxons. In short, they are forced to turn to their own devices because they find so many of their own race who should be working with them in the camps of the enemy. Unfortunately, this is actually my actual experience right now, and the school I attend. There are Black instructors, and the head of the school is actually a Black male. But I've come to him with a slew of complaints via email, and I've been completely I guess ignored. And I have a paper trail of like just so many unresponded to emails to the point where I don't even bother to try to change the situation. I kind of just handle my mistreatment the best way I can. But there are also even Black instructors who are afraid to even respond to conversations about racism, white supremacy. So it's still a problem, and I think the problem is now exacerbated because you have black youth who are so surrounded by people who just completely exploit their whatever they consider to be Black culture is completely exploited, completely used, and they're given this image of the thug, of the gang member, of this this creation, and they ascend to perform those behaviors and take on that image, and it's not really who they are. It was never who they're supposed to be. It's an imaginary white concept of a thug, and it's sad because they have cell phones and technology, but they use the technology for entertainment in the form of social media and memes. So they won't ever reach constructive information by normal channels. I'm not sure how, if ever. So I see this being a problem that's going to get worse and worse, you know, unless there is massive changes to, you know, everyone around us, everybody, I guess.
Yeah, I can resonate with your explanation. From when you was reading that resonate, what it drew me back to my foundation stages of when I was doing a foundation course to get into university, and you had to have like a basic of academic study in you, and European Thought and Society was a class that I took, and there was only, let's say, a class of 20 people. There's about 3 Black people in the class, like a mixed race individual and two Black students, and the rest are white European and Arab and Asian. And as the teacher was explaining about the Ottoman Empire and the Crusades, he literally kept on saying, "You need to. There's so much more information out there. You guys need to do your research. You need to do your research." And he was looking at us like the Black students, and I could tell that he wanted to say way more, but he almost looked like he was about to start sweating, and like something wanted me to prompt him and ask him out after class, but I left. I didn't ask. But the point was that I could tell that there was so much more. Now I know where the avenue that he was going down, but even as a lecturer and in a classroom, he didn't want to upset the other students or say too much or anything that could get him in trouble. So it's something that's very tiptoed around.
Wow. Really should not be surprised by anything I hear at this point. Thanks so much for sharing that, Mary.
Amazing how we're conditioned to protect the feelings of white people and to protect white supremacy. Oh man, this is powerful.
I'll share something that happened yesterday that involved me and a white female, but I'll do it after this course. So I got 6 more things to get through. I want to read something from page 39, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, or if anything in the new approach segment stuck out to y'all. This is what really stuck out to me, and it reads: the second period might well be. This is when Chancellor Williams is talking about what he's like what's going on in certain time periods in Africa. It's the certain periods. The second period might well be from the conquest of Lower Egypt by Ethiopian leader Menes in 3100 BC to the end of the 6th dynasty, 2181, also the end of the Old Kingdom. This was the period that gave birth to Egypt, and before which there was no Egypt. It was the period during which Black kings united the 2 lands, started the dynasty lineage system, and began the building of the greatest civilization. The greatest in-depth review and concentration of research should be focused on the second period. It was, in fact, the golden age in the history of the Blacks, the age in which they reached the pinnacle of a glory so dazzling in achievements that Western and Arab writers felt compelled to erase it by sheer power of their position beginning Black history over 3,000 years later and limiting it such as they allowed to Africa south of the Sahara. I enjoyed that because it just shows you the fear that Black people invoke in white people and sometimes non-white people. because there's something that's been accomplished and never been accomplished before, and it's intimidating, I suppose. And especially when your whole life you've been taught white is right, white is pure, white is innocent. When you're faced with things that are not that, it makes you uncomfortable. It makes one question things, and questions in a white supremacist system is very dangerous.
White people hate being questioned or being asked questions by a non-white person.
I know all about that firsthand.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that part that you read as well, the detailed information and just that understanding in that time period of how many times they were invaded. The notes that I had written is that the Arabs or the constant invasions destroyed the African-Egypt connection, the pyramids. Also, that we have knowledge of knowing now that there are so many pyramids in Sudan, the neighboring country to Egypt. But when you think of Egypt and you think of Sudan, they're completely two different. Like just envisioning it in your mind, they don't register the same. One looks completely Arab, one looks black, and even the pyramids that are in Sudan, we don't make that connection, or people don't go around touring that as one of the great wonders as well. They found a way to completely lose the connection and its function as well as its connection. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
On page 40, there's a really interesting piece where he writes, "Elsewhere, I have posed the most perplexing question. If the blacks were among the first builders of civilization, and their land the birthplace of civilization, what has happened to them that has left them since then at the bottom of the world society? Precisely what happened? The Caucasian answer is simple and well known. The blacks have always been at the bottom. This answer is clear, even in the histories and other educational material, which whites so busily prepare for blacks. Almost all of the true answers will be found in the study of the causes of the migrations and the tragic results stemming directly from the seemingly endless movements of fragmented peoples. How was the art of writing lost by one of the first peoples to invent it? Study the migrations. How and why did once a great people with a common origin splinter off into countless little independent societies and chiefdoms from which 2,000 different languages and dialects developed? Study the migrations. What caused the brother against brother genocide, wars, hatred, slavery, and mutual suspicion among the various black societies? Again, study the migrations. There will be several subdivisions of great importance. Slavery and the slave trade, for example, would include Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This would be the background for later periods covering Black history in the United States, South America, and the Caribbean areas. Really great part. Lots of great information. I never once thought of migrations, especially being forced migration, either via being forced to invaders or being forced by nature. That has to have played a major role in the miscommunication and miseducation and total confusion of Black people now in Africa, at least. It definitely plays a role in sustaining that reality.
Yeah, I also found that to be very interesting, you know, the migrations. I never thought about it either. I'd have to agree with you on that, Trey. And I never would have thought, I guess it never occurred to me that, that, you know, different African peoples migrating throughout the land is ultimately, you know, what made it easy for them to be conquered and enslaved. So I think that, like he's saying, that he places a lot of huge importance on those migrations. So I think it would be very interesting to learn about those. And it seems like it would also be difficult to learn about those because there's no written histories, there's only oral histories. But then again, you know, I'm gonna start trusting oral histories just as much as I trust written histories.
Thanks, Ezekiel, for chiming in. Always appreciate it.
There's also to further explore migration. I believe there's a book called "Warm from Other Songs." "Warm from Other Suns" by Isabel Wilkerson about like the Great Black Migrations.
I feel like migration is not. I feel like the term should be like displacement or something.
Yeah,
because I think
dislocating.
migration
Yeah.
implies a type of like concerted effort to leave based on like, but it's really like you're being displaced, you're being forced to leave because most people don't want to leave their homes generally.
And it seemed like they were being haunted by the invaders, and they're being forced to leave due to like the food situation.
Yeah, there's like specific regions where there's foods and they end up having to migrate to regions where food is not as plentiful. I mean, not migrate, but they're displaced into these regions, like forced.
I agree. Something did feel off about the term migration when I mentioned invaders, but in the context of if white people had anything to do with the quote unquote migrations, I would consider it mass displacement and white people practicing white supremacy. On the same page where I read those migration bits, I wanted to also read the eighth division part, and it reads, this is on page 41 also. The eighth division is the re-emergence of African kingdoms and empires by regions between the 10th and 19th centuries. This was the period during which there were attempts in every region of Africa to restore the glory that was Ethiopia's. It is doubtful if any of these black states realized that they were being slowly but steadily surrounded and hemmed in from all directions by invaders from the seacoast and across the Sahara. The ultimate fall of the black states, first under Islamic and then under European Christian blows, closed this period with the triumph of colonialism. Colonialism, the final period in the the final period is the Black Revolution that ended political colonialism with the rise of political independent states. This would take us from 1950 to the present and should be subdivided for the developments in Black America, South America, and the islands of the sea. But and this part right here where he says the ultimate fall of the black states, first under Islamic and then under European Christian blows, closed this period with a triumph of colonialism. When I read this, I could just see Africa being surrounded, defeated, and conquered. I could just see it all happening in a quite tragic way. So I thought I would make a note about it and read it to y'all because I definitely got some type of download from that paragraph. Was I the only one?
I'm getting emotional again right here on this part because going back to up in the first paragraph where it says, he asked the question, what caused the brother against brother internecine wars, hatred, slavery, and mutual suspicion among the various Black societies? you know, amongst ourselves, and how that applies in the neighborhoods today. So in the neighborhoods today, we don't have communities. You know, we've converted them into neighborhoods. So now you have, at least in East Oakland, I'm sure it's that way in other places, you have blocks, neighborhoods warring against each other, killing each other right in the hood. And it's the same thing in the Middle East. It's the same thing in wherever there's wars. It's the same. And I love how the writer brought it right up to the current political climate that we're in today. Um, he said this would take us all the way from the 50s to the present. This guy brought us. Me, I've never seen anything like it. This guy, man, he's bringing it all the way home here. When he says the ultimate fall of the black states, um, first under Islamic and then European Christian blows, closed this period with the triumph of colonialism. So in essence, we're still living under a state of colonialism. We are in a neo-colonialist state right now.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, well, I would say no. We just live under white supremacy. According to the code, we shouldn't use that term colonialism.
Got you.
You have to use it with caution, right?
Right.
So nearing the end of the chapter, China comes up, the Far East comes up, and quite a suspicious place, if I'm being honest. Quite a suspicious history as well, if I'm being honest. But I'm also a confused victim of racism, white supremacy. So I'm not even sure if I'm making sense most of the time I'm talking. So I wanted to read from page 42, and it reads, ancient China and the Far East, for example, must be special areas of African research. How do we explain such a large population of Blacks in southern China, powerful enough to form a kingdom of their own? Or the Black people in Formosa, Australia, and the Malay Peninsula, Indochina, the Andaman, and the numerous other islands, the heavy concentration of Africans in India, and the evidence that the earliest Aryan chiefs were Black, which will make Hitler rise from his grave. Open still another interesting field.
Love, you can mute yourself.
Oh, my bad, I'm muting myself. Where was I? Oh yeah, even the Negroid finds in early Europe appear not to be as challenging as the Black population centers in Asia. For again, reference is not made to small groups which may have wandered anywhere over the earth. Rather, our concern is with great and dominant populations. These are Blacks who have so puzzled Western scholars that some theorize that Asia or Europe may be the homeland of Africans after all. The African population in Palestine, Arabia, and Mesopotamia are better known. Although the many centuries of Black rule over Palestine, South Arabia, and Mesopotamia should be studied and elaborated in more detail. All of this will call for a new kind of scholarship, a scholarship with any mission other than to discovery of truth, and one that will not tremble with fear when the truth is contrary to what one prefers to believe. Nothing is clearer than the tragic fact that Africa, like the rest of the Black world, has only the illusion of being free and independent. It is only about one third free. It is still as economically enshackled as it ever was, in some respects more so. Thought I ever should read that because this is a lot of great information, which is going to be unpacked throughout this book, I hope. And he lets us know that this work is not done. It's going to require new scholars to set out to, I guess, get more truth and discover what really happened, to the best of their capabilities also. And that was the last thing I had noted down from this chapter. So we could, if people had questions or things they wanted to bring up, they can do that now. If not, we can just move to closing comments.
Oh yeah, very, very briefly. Thank you for sharing that last part. I thought it was very important, the part especially about the Africa being 1/3 free. Even Dr. Anise, she talks about, the resources in the last chapter you read. She says what Europe needs to do is leave Africa's resources alone, right? So I can see how economically they're still being tied up. They're not really able to make money for themselves or use their resources to their benefits. I'm interested in learning, what exactly is that? What else is there, that would get us the whole way there to being free completely. I know a lot of that has to do with ending the system of racism and white supremacy. I was talking to my cousin recently, and I was just talking to him about kind of the stuff I've been learning about, racism, and he told me, quote for word for word, we don't really experience that over here, and it's kind of, I mean, I can understand, what you mean, but you experience racism. You definitely do, just because, you might not come in contact with white people all day, or you might not be in the same rooms as them. That doesn't mean, you're not experiencing racism. So definitely there's still a lot of confusion that needs to be taken care of. So it could be, down to education is probably in there somewhere, because they're still learning, the European educational systems. So I just wanted to add that point. I also had something else, but I'll leave it for people who want to comment on, that.
Yeah, thank you, Kweku. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. As somebody, when I was 12 years old, I went to Sierra Leone and I was educated there for a bit. And one thing I definitely picked up, if each colonized, even though we're colonized by the British, the Lebanese trade and live a lot and live in Sierra Leone. They've migrated a lot there, and in the education system there, you're taught Arab first before you're taught English, and their culture is highly imprinted. So even to get to the West African Sierra Leonean tribal culture that I am at is still at home. Even in the institutions there, it's supremacy taught based. So that's the first place I'd say that to tackle it in education, and that yeah.
Definitely.
I think it's interesting because the part about the being 1/3 free, like that was written in this book is written in the early 70s, so there's so much like African liberation against so-called colonialism happening. But I would say like 1/3 is an overestimate. But I guess at that time it was applicable. But now I would say that's like an overestimation. I don't think that Africa is even close to 1/3 free. I don't know what you guys think, but like I think they're so far from that.
I agree.
I think.
Oh.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh my God.
I was just gonna say, I think I don't know, 1/3 estimate kind of sounds about right. I don't. It's definitely tough because they are moving in directions of where they are trying to control. Actually, yeah, I agree with that. It's just definitely an overestimation. Not
There's
thinking about it.
If there's like 9 areas of people activity, that's like 9 divided by 3 is 3, right? Can you 3 areas of people activity that Africa is free from European control? That being like, what are the 9 areas? Education, entertainment, law, labor, politics, economics, religion, sex, war, count. Like, I can't. I mean, you don't have to split it that way, but I'm just saying, like, for example,
Yeah,
there's like 0 of 9.
So you can put it that way for context, and by doing it that way, it doesn't feel like a third at all.
Wouldn't you all consider too, like, the mass amount of people from Asia going there and setting up tents? And I won't say really tents, but setting up shop there and purposefully, marrying the African women and having children with them as well. And it's like, to me, it's like another. It's yeah, white supremacy. That's what's happening again. The whole thing so they can keep the people down, keep them in ties with the Asian folks, and thinking like them, and promoting things that are for them to build up their communities. Yeah, so I would have to say I agree that 1/3 is a stretch.
Yeah, I think we're witnessing the new destruction, no, the further destroying of Black civilization with the Chinese going in there and just doing what has been historically done there, going there, creating a new mulatto race of hybrid people who are gonna eventually take control over that land that they're having babies on. Yeah.
I think China's I think China is in the process of uniting with Africa. I think it's inevitable ultimately, and this is probably going to cause some controversy, but I think that's China's key to becoming the next superpower because they have the plutonium, uranium, the cobalt, and the coltan, and the lithium for everything else. And so if China and Africa actually unite, because China has the technology, the ability to take those resources and turn them into weapons and computer technology. And
But
then
they unite.
They
can't unite. It's not unity.
It's impossible for China and Africa to unite because China is coming in as a I understand that as a with the supremacy mentality, but
enemy.
Well, right, I get that, but this is what caused me to like pause when I saw a Chinese guy in Senegal who owned a Senegalese restaurant serving Senegalese food, and he was dressed in a complete Senegalese outfit, and the fact that there's laws I know in Kenya, I don't know about in the other countries, that require if you're Chinese and you want to own land, you have to marry. If you get married to a Kenyan woman, then you can own property.
That's what I was saying. Purposely marrying them. It's bad news.
I mean, like the first example, do you think that African people in China can set up Chinese food shops and be accepted in
right.
those places? Yeah, right. So it's not like a cross-cultural thing. And also, like, because Africa is not united as a continent, everything that they have to leverage, all their natural resources, they're not leveraging it in that way, They're not saying like, hey, China, we can give to you or we can give to these other people. So what are you going to give us? They're just like giving it, right? The governments are just giving it away at the behest of the people who are saying don't do that. So
I just heard a Congolese mine was sold for $50 million 50 million, a cobalt mine. A whole entire mine was sold to a Chinese investor for $50 million.
Yeah, they said
Wow.
if you own Congo, you own the world, right? Like,
Every resource is needed for technology and to continue civilization.
which is why they can't encourage the governments to organize them. They have corrupt leaders, so they have this dysfunction, and they can come in and make these little corrupt deals. And yeah, as everybody was speaking, the thoughts that was coming to my mind was more so like, okay, so the Berlin conference that happened that split Africa up, and Germany took their region, England, the British Empire, America took their own region, and everybody has colonized. Even after independence, they still have some kind of like weighing or footing in these countries through trade or import or however they have their holding in them. I feel like China was just late to the party. China and Asian countries kind of had to prove their own weight in the Western world after their bombing and really establishing their power. And now with their being so highly, being really high in the economic chain, they are able to go around and do their dominance around Africa now. And you do hear lots of racist stories of like superior complexes of certain African people not being allowed to go into the restaurants that they're setting up shop in. I believe it was Uganda or Zimbabwe or an East African country, and they had to be banned and told that you can't do that, you can't stop Africans from coming in here. So they have tried, and in some circumstances, and also given poison rice and selling there's like an inflatable thing that you can use like as a handkerchief, and it comes out really small like a tablet, selling that as actual tablets to in certain parts of Africa as well, all under the name of this supremacy.
yeah, they also like when COVID started happening in China, they were blaming Black people, and they literally quarantined only the Black people at the beginning of COVID, like saying that it had to do with like Black people somehow.
And they were also evicting something was in the
Yeah,
news.
yeah, they were deporting them back to whatever countries that they were in. And these are not like, these are African people doing like so-called, businessmen. Like these are not just like the lower strung like workers or something. So I personally feel like we have to have the Chinese mindset in that they look out for themselves. I'm not saying we have to exploit other countries, but I'm just saying like we need to like just look out for ourselves and our people. And I think cross like race, whatever unity comes when Black people are actually like connected as one and able to leverage that. But when we're all splintered, China can make deals with all different countries and they're all different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I wanted to add to kind of what Ben was saying earlier about the Chinese. I think in the past, and even now, I think Africa is aware of the resources that they have, but for the most part, they have no way or any means of actually getting to those resources or using them. So unfortunately, they have to rely on superpowers like China, for the most part now. And I think the best way, Africa needs to learn from its history and understand that they should be viewing these Chinese people the same way they should have viewed the Europeans coming in. And so when they're making, deals or whatever with the Chinese, they need to make sure that they're expressing their best interests at heart and not just, giving the Chinese the means of, coming in or giving them the means to come and take all these resources or doing, dumb stuff like selling whole coal mines to the Chinese. This isn't the first time either that I've heard, of something like this happening in Africa. But I don't think there is any such thing as unity. There's, you can't unify with those kind of people. They're only here to take advantage. And Africa is not the only place China's in either. They're in the Caribbean too now, and they're all over those islands, on all over those countries, basically, colonizing them as well. So.
But the difference is that they didn't come with guns. They're not using brute force and threat, and they're just using money and capitalism. And I think
I would even say maybe even deceit. You know, maybe they've been trained with in the Europeans' art of deceit. So maybe they're coming over with deceit. Maybe they don't need weapons to do it. You know, just enough cash and deceit, and take over the world.
If you read Nkrumah's Neocolonialism, like the highest form of imperialism, they don't need guns anymore, right? They all they need to do is get a privileged class of Africans in the government and in business that they do all of their trade with, and they prop up that class while, like, I'm sure the people who live around the coal mine or whatever, the cobalt mine that was sold, had no say in what happened, right? I'm sure that deal was made amongst a privileged class of people in the Congo. And so that's how neocolonialism works. They don't have to have guns anymore. And I think even if they had guns, that would bring way too much attention, right? They can just do these low key things and like cause environmental destruction to these small communities without them having any say in it.
And you're right, because there are proxy wars going on that the colonialists, the neo-colonialists are behind. They're not doing the actual shooting with the guns, but they're propping up and supporting. Like, for example, now it's terrible, I hate it, but Kigani, who's the president of Rwanda, who Museveni, who's the president of Uganda, who's been there for 30 years, who did these overthrows over the years, is now, I understand, attacking his ally, who is the Rwandese, who Museveni's army is the one who supported Kagame in stopping the genocide in Rwanda. So there's a gold mine right over the border of Rwanda in the Congo, and then there's another gold mine on the border of Uganda in the Congo. So Museveni has that one that's in the Congo. Kagame has the one near Rwanda. So now Museveni wants to take Kagame's, you know what I mean? He wants to take his, whose former ally, he wants to take his mine. And so I guess what I'm saying is that the ultimate solution is for the African leaders, which is, it seems impossible, unfathomable to us now, because they're all factioned and so indoctrinated with greed and corruption and capitalism that we can't fathom them coming. But it's just what Ash said, until we as Black people, Africa here, Pan-African in a Pan-African sense, come together and are able to regulate people, starting in Africa and here and everywhere, regulate our commerce and control our own commerce and control our own resources. Until we come together, it's going to be difficult or impossible to regulate the Chinese and the other Europeans that are continuously neo-colonizing Africa and all indigenous peoples. One last thing in closing. Malcolm X, before he was murdered, was successfully pursuing joining the and he mentions the Organization of African Unity in this preview, and that's going to be like my mission, when I get my ducks in a row. My primary purpose on this planet will be for African Americans to join the Organization of African Unity, so that we can file charges against the U.S. for crimes against humanity, for everything that they've done at the UN. That was and you can YouTube Malcolm X's speech on that, on going to the UN against the U.S.
That's interesting you bring that up about the genocide. I don't remember where it was, but I think there was a whole paper, an essay, book even written about, that the whole genocide and going to
We
UN.
charge genocide. I ran in like early 19. hundreds by a group of Black scholars, but it was shut down during the civil rights.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I am.
believe was it? So was it? Did it have to do with Brown v. Board of Education? Like in terms of like that's how they got them to quiet down about that. Like that's why it passed or something. In the Supreme.
Nah,
I feel like
I,
I watched something like that. I might be wrong.
yeah, I remember it losing steam when the civil rights was picking up because yeah, that could be incorrect.
Okay. Closing comments.
Just throw this one last thing right in right quick. That Malcolm X was murdered 2 weeks after he left Kenya. He was in Kenya meeting with, I got to look up the guy's name, one of the leaders in Kenya about that, about joining the Organization of African Unity. And Malcolm X came back to the US, got murdered. 2 weeks later, the person that he was meeting with in
Was
Kenya
it?
was.
I know you could also do it too, low.
I know, I'm just.
I got to look up and find out who the name of that guy was. So there's definitely they're watching us. They're watching us right now. So
I agree with everything that's been said so far. Thanks everyone for sharing. Let's go ahead and get into closing comments, please. Um, for myself, I just want to say that this is up to us to just do our due diligence and be sure that we're reading books that are written for, I guess, pure intentions to educate and help solve the problem of racism, white supremacy. That's where I'm gonna stop up my start my closing comments. Mary, take it away.
Thank you so much. I felt like this was an amazing discussion. It's got my brain buzzing with so much more, but we're just at the preview. So like, yeah, I look forward to us reading much further. For closing comments, I'm just the note that I have taken from these pages that we have read together and in our own time is shifting the focus is the best thing that we can do to gain and apply the knowledge of our strengths and learn from our failures as we navigate in this Western world. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm really grateful for all that Vice Chancellor will, and you can feel it. And just a preview that look at how much we've been able to discuss about. That's just a preview into the content. So this 16 years of research is not gonna go in vain. I'm definitely gonna enrich myself with this knowledge.
Yes, for me, closing comments. Another great piece of work from another African ancestor, bringing us this knowledge and bringing us this truth. Very necessary read. I'm looking forward to uncovering a lot of these truths, and I feel that this piece of work is definitely going to enlighten all of us and definitely inspire all of us. So, looking forward to reading it with you guys. And, yeah.
Yeah, I am very interested and fortunate to be able to understand and hopefully learn how the great African race, the great builders of society and civilization has become the race that I see today, which is actually not a race, which is a bunch of a group of nobodies, I would call it. And in 2021, it's a group of nobodies. So thanks to Chancellor Williams for showing us how what has been done to us.
yeah, I feel a degree of after reading this, I feel a degree of more responsibility than blame, although I still feel blame and anger towards what's been perpetrated on us. But with this information, this little preview, I'm I'm feeling more a sense of responsibility that as a result of just some human nature, our human nature being exploited, yes, and then all of the different forces that has caused us, and just knowing, I guess, some of the shame and guilt of not being good enough. After reading Frances Cress Welsing and this, has been lifted a little bit because I kind of blame myself sort of for some of this behavior unbeknownst, and so I'm feeling a little empowered and liberated. And just want to read the last sentence. Our history can then become at once the foundation and guiding light for united efforts in serious planning what we should be about. Thank you, you all. I love this, man. This is game-changing information right here. Really grateful to be in this group.
My closing comments are, I'm really excited to read this book, and I think something that I'm gonna implore myself to do is to like read it in terms of like understanding strategy and tactics in terms of what we could have done better, what we fell for, and like how those things are reverberating to this day. And so I'm really, really excited to read the next chapter and just to read the book in general. And I think that it's really amazing to be able to read it with other people and discuss it, especially with people who are like at least us trying to assemble a code. So yeah, I really appreciate the group. Thank you, everyone.
Well,
Closing comments.
Closing comments. What can I say? It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. Always learning something new from the book club. What can I say? I'm definitely looking forward to our next book club meeting to digest into this a little bit more, and really get to the root. I'm hoping, it's hard to say because there's so much stuff in the world to know. It's almost like you won't know everything. So as long as I get a little bit of hope for that, a little bit closer, and just makes sense. Everything starts to click and make sense again. So, yeah, that's definitely my closing comment for me. Thank you, guys.
Okay, is that it? Is that the last person sharing?
Yeah.
Thank you all for a wonderful discussion of their first session for Destruction of Black Civilization. Should I be
reading 2 chapters next week, right? Sorry to cut you off, Trey. I thought you were done.
2 chapters?
No,
I thought I was just going to read another 20 pages. Like,
we're not
3.
reading chapters.
Cool.
I think the next 2 chapters are like 10 pages or so.
Yeah, chapter 1 was very short. I saw it was like 8 pages or something.
And then chapter 2 is the Ethiopia's oldest daughter, Egypt.